Hello, it's Jason Renaud with Alternative Mobile Services Association and AMSA Talks. Today I'm with Ben Adam Climer. Welcome, Ben.
Hello. Thank you for having me. Yeah, very excited.
Great. And we want to talk today. We're talking training, we're talking consultation, we're talking a little bit of Los Angeles, and who knows where we'll get, but we'll probably try to keep it down to 20 minutes or so and give you some information about what Ben Adam does. Ben Adam,
Sounds
why don't
good.
we start by you're telling me a little bit about how you got into the position you're now with Exodus and with as a trainer.
Yeah, so I got my career sort of in social services started in Hollywood, working at a drop-in center with people living on the street, which turned into a case management job doing mobile case management with unhoused people, which then I moved to Oregon where I'm from, and I moved to Eugene, and then that experience got me the job at CAHOOTS. And that was during the Springfield expansion when CAHOOTS was moving from Eugene and into Springfield. I worked there for 5 years, a little over 5 years. As I started as a crisis counselor, and then I got my EMT license while I was there, so that I could do both roles, the crisis work and the EMT work, while there. I then moved back to Southern California, and during the sort of large protests and things like that of 2020, I got involved in consulting first with Whitebird and then independently, doing helping develop mobile crisis teams based on the CAHOOTS model, which then led me to cities like Petaluma and what's still functioning as the SAFE team there, as well as in Orange County, with a team that's referred to as the Hope Team, or Be Well, in cities like Huntington Beach and Garden Grove, again, which are also still functioning. I then also went and assisted with developing a couple of teams, one at UC Santa Cruz, and also training a team at UC Davis that's run through their fire department, as well as some training and some other kind of consulting things with cities like Vallejo and Culver City, City of Santa Cruz, City of Stockton, just kind of all around with just a variety of different types of assistance. Then, about a year and a half ago, I was hired by a large sort of mental health agency called Exodus Recovery, who runs programs in 4 counties in California: Fresno, LA, Orange, and San Diego. Many of them crisis stabilization units, but also things like shelters and homeless outreach and that kind of stuff, as well as a mobile crisis team in San Diego County, and then the city-based mobile crisis team that I'm the training director for currently, called UMCR, which stands for Unarmed Model of Crisis Response. And I'm the training director for them, and I wear many hats in that as well. And then I also work as a sort of consulting trainer for a county-based mobile crisis team in Sutter and Yuba counties
Hmm.
in Northern California, that is operated by a little nonprofit called Site Crisis. And the program director for that is one of my longtime CAHOOTS uh, 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 shift partners, Manning Walker. And then I also do crisis de-escalation trainings generally for people who are homeless outreach workers, case managers, or really anyone who will have me. I've done it from as many diverse sort of situations as just mutual aid groups with people who hand out food to folks living on the street, to librarians, to coffee shop workers. So really depends on who, if anybody wants to learn about it, then I'll help them out.
That's quite a wide range in resume. Can you tell me a little bit about, well, let's start by your giving me your definition of what mobile crisis is. I think that'll help frame this a little bit because if we're training something, we want to know what it is.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think that I think that one of the maybe deficiencies of my definition is that we'll have to kind of start with defining what it isn't.
Hmm.
And so when we think about uh, mobile crisis, I first want to think of it as a first responder system,
Hmm.
um, akin to police departments or sheriff's departments, fire departments, and EMS systems. And so it's a first responder system where police are primarily tasked with crime and violence. Fire departments are obviously tasked with the prevention and expulsion of fires, and then EMS is tasked with medical emergencies or non-emergencies, just medical based stuff. Mobile crisis teams really operate as the sort of catch-all, or at least the mobile crisis teams that I've worked on and I've helped develop, I should say, maybe work as the catch-all for anything that somebody might request assistance with that is either a crisis or an emergency that doesn't meet the categories of those other things. And so frequently these are things like somebody who's having a mental health crisis, somebody who's having some kinds of substance use issue, but it could also be somebody experiencing a crisis or an emergency related to their developmental or intellectual disability, their dementia, or things developing from their economic status, whether that's their poverty or their homelessness more broadly. And because those things don't really fit into the mold of a crime or a violent situation, they're not medical emergencies and they certainly aren't fires. We don't really have great systems put in place to handle those things, but people certainly do call requesting help for them into the 911 systems. And so mobile crisis is designed, in my experience, in the systems that I work on to go and handle those types of issues.
And so separating from ambulance, we're really seeing ambulance now as being a fast transport to hospital.
Correct. Yeah.
And mobile crisis being we're not necessarily going to take you someplace.
No, yeah, that's a good distinction as well. That mobile crisis is also when it's done well, it is very strengths based in the sense that our number one goal is to identify what the person who's having the crisis has strengths in, and how we can lean on those strengths first before we make decisions to go and bring in extra resources, like going to the crisis center or going to the hospital or something like that. And it also, it's harm reduction, it's strengths based, it's rooted in this idea that I'm not necessarily the expert come to solve your problem. I am the person who, when you have no one else to rely on, when you have no one else to lean on, I will be there and I will support you, regardless of who you are or what your issue is. And so I will be alongside of you. I will be it's an accompaniment concept, not an intervention concept, right? And so my expertise as a crisis counselor is not it's not the same as my expertise as an EMT, right? My expertise as an EMT is to say, okay, this is the crisis, this is the emergency, this is how we manage that emergency until we get you to definitive care with the doctor. Whereas my expertise as a crisis counselor is to say, uh, okay, you seem like the resources you have at your disposal, your internal resources and your external resources with your friends, your family, your work, etc., feel really exhausted and you feel like no one is there to be with you. So how can I give you that feeling that you are not alone and therefore you're strong enough to manage the situation,
So,
because you have someone with you, because you're being accompanied. And sometimes that means that we're able to sort of make that person feel heard and understood and cared for, and that's all that they need, right? That's all they need. They just needed someone to listen because, oh my God, nobody listens. Or sometimes we get to the point where they're like, I feel better, but I still don't feel like I'm ready for you to go. I'm ready for you to be alone, right? I'm ready to go back to this situation. So I'd like to go somewhere else where I can spend more time with other people as well. And then we'll transport.
that's fabulously more complicated than a broken leg
Yes, precisely.
or a stolen car. I mean, your
Yes.
decision tree is individualized for each incident, and
Yes.
the toolkit is substantially larger.
Yes.
So when you look at training someone, how do you go what's the bottom line necessary training for doing mobile crisis work? Say you have a perfectly aware individual willing to do the job and deal with the trauma and the salary and the repercussions to their social life, and what do you want them to know before they step out on the street?
So I think what we start with is we start with a what we call sort of just trauma-informed de-escalation. And what that really focuses on is what is going on for people sort of internally when and not just internally, but maybe even sort of like culturally, historically, and what mechanisms go on inside of a person rooted in the history of humans, right? Just like what are we as people? And then recognizing that if you step into that situation where that person is feeling that tension, that stress, that anxiety, that fear, all those things that they're going through, you have to be able to step into that situation in a way that conveys to them quite clearly that you are not a threat. Because if they perceive you to be a threat,
Mhm.
then they are not going to de-escalate. And one of the things that I've really been pushing on is this idea that I have never de-escalated anyone because I cannot de-escalate them. They have to de-escalate themselves. The only person that can actually de-escalate someone is themselves. And they're only going to do that if they feel safe to de-escalate. If they don't feel safe to de-escalate, they're going to stay here. They're going to stay ready. They're going to stay in fight or flight. They're going to stay prepared
Mhm.
to manage the danger. And so we really drive home how to make yourself not be perceived as a danger. That's where we got to start. And we also and then we go from there to okay, now if you're putting forward this and that person's still perceiving you to be a danger, what's the adjustment? How do we
Okay.
change? How do we shift? And so that's really where we get started
So that's the
is with
basic
those
text is
concepts.
the de-escalation. What else do you suggest the teams have as their basic training and regime?
So we focus a lot on we do a lot of scene safety. We do a lot of useful things. One of the things that I found in my own work and then other people's work as well is that when you're going to talk to somebody who's, let's say, they're having a manic episode or they're hearing voices, people feel very powerless to assist those people
Hmm.
because their sort of understanding of what that person is going through is that the only person who can assist that person is a doctor with psych meds, right? That's the only thing that could really help. And so all we've got to do is we just got to keep this person calm enough to get them to that spot, which is, of course, very alienating for the person who's having that experience. It's very scary to be told, well, there's nothing I can do because the only person who can help is this person over here who is far away from you and doesn't may or may not listen to what you're actually experiencing emotionally. And so one of the things that we really focus on is how to talk to people who are going through those experiences in a way that is supportive of them in their actual emotional state, rather than getting fixated on the symptoms. We talk a lot about what people might be experiencing when they use certain drugs, when they're intoxicated on, and certain things. We go over a lot of the social safety net, right? So whether that's SSI or Section 8 housing or things like that. And then we spend time really thinking to ourselves, what might a person who's accessing those resources feel about those resources and the fact that they have to access those resources? Do they feel embarrassed? Do they feel empowered? Do they feel because some folks they feel good because this is the most money they've ever received in their entire lives when they get their $1,000 a month on SSI, right? So this is a really exciting thing for them. Other people feel embarrassed because at one point they were making a lot of money and they started having tons of problems, and now they're living in the space, right? So what are the feelings that might be associated with those things? What are the feelings that might be associated with drug use? And then we really focus on, especially in my training, on how to validate those feelings and how to sit with people and be with them and be open and listen to them in a way that doesn't make them feel threatened. Again, critical. How can we help this person not feel threatened?
Hmm.
So we do all of that, and then also in my training work, we do what I call sort of like high fidelity scenario based training,
Hmm.
where we hire actors and then we bring those actors in and they act out everything from suicidality to hearing voices to being intoxicated to having fights with their spouses to all these types of things. And then when we're completed with that, we do really open debriefs with folks, with the staff. And what we found is that in those high fidelity scenario based trainings, we found that people train much quicker because one of the things that happens is they get to see themselves and their coworkers make mistakes
Hmm.
in situations where the stakes are low, right? This is not an actually suicidal person. So if you screw up while talking to them, that's okay because you're not nervous that they're going to go die afterwards because of the dumb
Right.
thing you said or
Right.
the bad thing you said. But also we create very supportive environments where we say, look, that was a mistake, and that's okay. This is how you can correct that.
And as you were
Um,
speaking about this earlier to me, I was realizing that you are in Los Angeles and you have a
yeah,
surfeit of unemployed actors to make use of. And so
correct.
this is quite a, I had not
Very
heard of
talented
any
ones
other,
as well.
I had not, are they better if you pay them more in your line of work? Well, don't, but I had not heard of other mobile teams using actual actors in this, but it makes so much sense. I know the police bureaus all over the country use
Right.
trained persons to do scenario. Uh,
And medical schools as well.
oh,
Yeah,
of course,
for helping doctors learn how to do good med assessments.
of course. So
Yeah.
perfect, makes very good sense. What other items do you want people to walk away, before they walk out the door the first time? What do you want them to know?
I want them to know that I sort of focus on this concept that they are actually capable, right?
Hmm.
That they can do this. That they're not, and that we're not in a situation where it's well, if I don't do it well enough, I'll just get law enforcement involved, right? Like, no, law enforcement should be involved if they're attacking you, right? Law enforcement should be involved if they're committing a crime. But if this person is having a mental health issue,
Hmm.
that's you. That's on you. That's your responsibility, right? That is you who needs to be able to handle that situation. And not paramedics, right? This is not a thing that we're just, well, the paramedics will show up and sedate this person. That's not what we're going for,
We're
right?
just
That's not
messing
our
around
goal.
until the Haldol shows up.
Exactly. And or in California is often for said.
Mhm.
And so, the kind of idea that like, oh yeah, that's where we got to go. Now, sometimes absolutely, right?
Yeah.
Sometimes there are folks that is what is required. But I want them to walk away with the confidence and with the belief that they can handle these types of situations and that they are the ones, right? It's not a oh, this is fire department, oh, this is police, oh, this is EMS, and then we're down here for those lesser things, right? It's we handle that stuff. I was on a call the other day, and we showed up, and LAPD was there, and we weren't sure if they had been sent as well or if they just happened to be there. And I think they had been sent, but we ended up finding the guy. We talked to him. We had a good conversation with him, and he was extremely delusional. And he believed he owned the 7-Eleven and all that kind of stuff. So the officers clear, and we're about to clear. We're about to drive away, and two other officers pull up, and so I'm like, oh no, So I roll down the window. I say, hey, you guys, don't worry about it. Your colleagues were already here, and we already kind of handled the situation and all that kind of stuff. And they're like, oh no, we're just stopping in to go to 7-Eleven and get a coffee or whatever. And I said, oh, okay, sorry. And they go, but just out of curiosity, do you guys handle like people who are acting erratic? And I was like, yeah, why would we not do that? Like absolutely, right? Like, and I want it to be this idea that that is exactly who we handle, right? It's not we handle them and then if we can't, then we get someone else involved. It's they're trying to handle it and they can't, then they get us involved, right? That's how I want us to be thinking about this. That's how I want mobile crisis to be perceived and utilized. Not that it goes us first and then everyone else, comes in when we can't do it. It's they might end up there, and then when they can't do it, we get involved, right? That's because that's our wheelhouse. That's our lane.
So you mentioned many agencies that you had helped before, and I assume that you were called in because those agencies didn't have your talent on board already. Tell us a little bit about the value of having someone come from outside of the agency to provide training. What does that bring in addition to the training itself?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll go maybe even a little broader than that, which is this idea that uh, there's different parts of doing mobile crisis that exist in other jobs, right? And that might be a therapist, that might be a homeless outreach worker, that might be working at a crisis stabilization unit. That might be, and a lot of that also just the basic first responder skills, right? That we train for people like EMTs, paramedics, police. And so mobile crisis takes little parts of each one of those jobs. You have to sort of incorporate the scene safety training and the sort of things that you would normally get, as a first responder, the sort of homeless outreach and having a knowledge how like homeless services works in the area and all that kind of stuff, or the sort of listening skills of a therapist and the sort of counseling skills that not the depth of them, but certainly some of those skills, and you've got to pull those all together. And what you see rather frequently is that in mobile crisis development is that usually a city or an agency or something like that will pull someone in who's got one of those skills,
Mm.
right? Maybe they're a therapist, or maybe they're a former homeless outreach worker, or maybe they worked as a paramedic back in the day, and now they're a therapist, right? So maybe they've got two of those skills or something like that. But typically, you find people who have one of those skills, and they know how to train that and they know how to teach that, and that's great. The difficulty with mobile crisis is that you need all of them, right?
Mm.
It really requires people to be able to do all those things. And so bringing someone in who has all of that because they've learned how to do all of that in their experience is very, very important. Um, and also, there's a lot of things that are going to happen that people just don't think about. And then they make decisions that based on information that is not complete. So especially when I was developing the SAFE team up in Petaluma, we found that quite frequently where we would be in meetings, and it would be the city manager, it'd be the fire department, and it'd be the police department. And the city manager would say, what about this idea? Let's say like the design of the vehicles, right? Well, the law enforcement guys are immediately going to what they know, right? Which is cop car. And the fire department's going, well, maybe we just have something kind of like an ambulance. And so to sort of bring them all in, and go, what we really need is we need something that doesn't look like a cop car so that people don't feel
Written.
like they're in trouble, right? We
Mhm.
need something that sort of like functions like we can put people in kind of like an ambulance where we put them in the back, but we might want a barrier, to sort of because we might be transporting people that might get aggressive with us and things like that. And we don't necessarily want to be in the back with them, and we don't have the tools to sedate them or anything. But we also need it to be where if a person vomits because they're intoxicated, it's easy to clean. So, we can't have like rugs or anything like that. But we also don't want it to look so sterile that anybody who comes in feels like they're being put in the padded wall or a jail cell. So there's a lot of things that you got to think about, like in terms of like what colors are things and what materials are they made out of, all that kind of stuff. That is important to note, and it's important to be able to sort of advise on those types of things as
So,
well.
so a lot of things you've talked about, it's really turning the whole idea of first responders on design on its head. And instead of looking to solve a problem, you're looking through the perspective of the recipient and saying, what does this
Yeah,
person need? Because it's so variant.
correct. Yeah. Yeah, right. And it's funny, because everyone sort of intuitively understands that, right? Like
Mhm.
a lot of police officers, a lot of firefighters, like they understand, okay, there's these situations that they're not really the way that our response system is designed. It's not really designed to go and handle those situations. And so it would be really nice to have something else. And so oftentimes what we find as well is that in the consulting work is some of our biggest advocates are the other first responders themselves.
Hmm.
They're very excited about the prospect of these types of things. And so yeah, we get a lot of support in the work that I've done, especially from police departments and fire departments,
I found that
because they
it's,
understand, they get what we're talking about when we tell them.
yeah, there's things that they can do that mobile crisis can't, won't, shouldn't do. It seems
Yeah,
to be that that line of distinction is getting a little firmer.
yeah, I think so. I think that part of that too is one of the things that we started doing in LA is we've started responding to some trespassing calls, right?
Hmm.
Which I
There's a
think a
lot of
lot of people would
calls.
say, oh, well, that's a criminal issue, not understanding that actually it's really not, depending on where that person is. So here's just another really great example of this. Some of my staff were on scene with police the other day, and this guy was saying, you need to get these people off this property. And the police were like, well, we could, but we need the owner to tell us that because that's how the law works in this country.
Yep.
You can't just because and for good reason, right? I can't just go up and say, this person needs to leave this house just because I don't like that person, right? I actually have to have some like ownership over that property in order to be able to make that decision. And so if they can't prove that they're not that they're if they can't prove that they are the owner, well then what are the police going to do, right? And in some ways they get around this with owners putting on what's called a letter of trespass, meaning that if anyone is there, more or less, and there's like maybe an employee or something of the company says they need to leave, then the police can make that decision. But there's lots and lots and lots of places out there that don't meet that criteria. Okay, so the police don't have the authority to remove that person from the property, right? Maybe they're homeless, or maybe they are like hearing voices telling them they need to be there.
Mhm.
Well, what the police's hands are tied, right? They can't use their typical tools to remove this person from the property. The fire department can't, obviously, and paramedics are very unlikely to go and sedate that person. So what do you have left, right? You have people who are good at making, um, at connecting with this person, listening to them, hearing what their situation is, hearing what the problem is in terms of their homelessness or their mental health, and then having the skills to go, it sounds like this has been a really good spot for you. It looks to me like you're getting a lot of attention from other folks, and this might not be the best place anymore. could we help you find a different spot, right? Maybe let's find a different spot where you won't be getting so much eyes on you.
Mhm.
And then getting that person to sort of say, okay, yeah, that sounds like a better idea, and then moving them along. Um, Whether that's taking them to a shelter or just getting them someplace that might have a shower or something like that that would be good for them, and then helping them find another place to go. There's lots and lots of situations out there where people call expecting that there is a law that can be enforced, only then to learn that there is no law that can be enforced, and then sort of being stuck in the same situation as before. Whereas with a good mobile crisis team who's skilled at handling those types of situations, you can actually create resolutions that are better where there is no law to be enforced and there is no crime to be, managed.
Well, Ben, Adam, it's been great to talk to you. Nice to hear what you've been doing, and I hear optimism in your voice.
I wouldn't be doing this if I didn't love it. And I do think that like the reality is that um, we are going to get to where I do believe that the model that I work in is going to be the model that sort of and the types of trainings that we do are what's going to be the thing that kind of, for lack of a better word, kind of wins the day, like, because it's very, very difficult to staff, train, and manage the types of mobile crisis teams that are not like this. And more law enforcement agencies are going to be wanting these things, especially as they see other agencies that have them. They're going to be like, we want that. That happens a lot of places that I work. I started out in Petaluma, then the city of Rohnert Park wanted it, then the city of San Rafael wanted it, now the city of Nevada wants it. And so the team that I started in Petaluma is now all up and down the 101 there. You see the city of Los Angeles, San Francisco, Oakland. I mean, there's places all over that want it. It's very difficult to hire licensed therapists for these types of things. And it's very difficult to hire people even with just their graduate degrees for them. So there has to be some kind of model that works and does what we need it to do in these types of situations that is cost effective, but also able to be staffed as well. And so I do think I am very optimistic that we are going to continue um, with what we're doing, and it will get more and more popular.
Great.